Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
This lecture really is a story of the past 18 months and what we looked at in terms of how we would secure the organisation and examine whether our model was effective enough to ensure that we can help as many children as possible to achieve their potential and be able to take on the challenges of a fast and changing world. We did three reviews really. The first was to really check our actual delivery model, to see if the model that we use was secure and would provide outstanding curriculum and an outstanding organisational set of practices, knowledge and attitudes. The second is we worked with the ESRC, the Third Sector Research Centre at Middlesex University and a KTP to really look at how we would grow our business and what we needed to do to grow our business. And in fact, what we ended up doing was doing quite a lot of research on the concept of social franchising. And thirdly, we spent a year looking at our social return on investment. So we thought if we wove the three things together, we should actually get a fairly solid perspective from where to grow the business, or not at all. David Cameron has said that in every part of Britain there are inspiring social entrepreneurs with pioneering solutions to complex problems of family breakdown, chaotic home environments, drugs and low aspiration. In fact, politicians of all persuasion appear to be united in the view that social enterprise can help deliver sustainable change. However, in my view, President Bill Clinton sums up the challenge better in his comment that nearly every problem has been solved by someone somewhere. The challenge for the 21st century is to find out what works and scale it up. And that's our challenge, really. So what is LEAF? We are a social enterprise. Our intention is to build a better future for London's children. We do this by developing and running community nurseries, children's centres, training programmes for young apprentices, and we operate everything within a multi-generational approach. Our model is based on a social mix, so that families from all aspects of the local community can come together in the same nursery but pay different fees. Most of our nurseries are sited in poor neighbourhoods bordered by areas of gentrification. And our success is persuading parents from both professional and poorer backgrounds to come to LEAF nurseries because actually we offer superlative childcare. Placed at the heart of local neighbourhoods, LEAF supports families to grow and nurture successful communities using the multi-generational approach, which is reflective from anything to do with grandparents groups, school projects, knitting groups, teenage and toddlers, or whatever is going to be a catalyst to actually connect people into the local community. There's much talk about communities, but actually what we really deal with quite often are disconnected neighbourhoods. As early years leaders, we have little time to make a difference. The children are with us such small time that we have to do everything that actually will matter. So understanding the community within which the child lives is very important in terms of the social context and is significant in terms of how we create services and what they should look like. The importance of understanding what community means to those children is really quite important in the early years sector. We start from the same principle as UNICEF, that all children have the right to the same opportunities and to live happy and healthy lives. And that actually poverty is one of the structural issues that gets in the way. And for that, we include both financial and emotional poverty, though they not necessarily come from the same root. Poverty is the single greatest threat to the well-being of children and families, and growing up in poverty can affect every area of children's development, social, educational, and personal. And there's a huge raft of research which consistently reports that persistent poverty has more detrimental effects on IQ, school achievement, social emotional functioning than transitory poverty, with children experiencing both types of poverty doing less well than the never poor children. By the age of 22 months, the gap between the rich and the poor is beginning to really extend, and it's almost impossible to begin to bring it together. And it also sets a fairly accurate predictor for the education outcomes at 26. Children growing up in poverty are 2.8 times more likely to have mental disorders, and that will account ultimately for 41% of all mental disorders and 59% of conduct disorders. And then you get the full cycle, the intergenerational cycle of poverty, where you get parents who themselves have been affected by poverty having an adverse effect on the health of their own children. Translate that into the future, and you'll find that 1 in 6 people in Britain have a literacy issue, and 50% of the prison population have literacy difficulties. And sadly, and rather shockingly, 50% of children from disadvantaged backgrounds start school with delayed language. Childcare actually does something to help reduce the risk of poverty because it gives people access to employment, and the link between going to work and reducing poverty are fairly well known. Also, early intervention is a broader concept, but early intervention in terms of early years in childcare, the research from the EPI project and from Graham Allen and Frank Field says it's good for children. It's particularly good for children from disadvantage. and it can actually narrow the achievement gap. Social enterprises have been given much approval and are kind of an interesting way of being part of our national economy. Social enterprises seem to be more willing to tackle some of the more entrenched social and environmental challenges in an innovative way. And that's why we are very much a social enterprising childcare organisation. I'm using the descriptor of social enterprise, for those of you who are not familiar with it, as a business that trades in the market with a social purpose. The profits of social enterprises are principally reinvested in the business to achieve social objectives. Social enterprises are in many forms, anything from a community development trust to a housing association to a charity. But in this case, we're running as a social business. Nicely summed up by Alison Ogden-Newton from Social Enterprise London, really, is social enterprise is about people. Social entrepreneurs run profitable businesses that reject exploitation and instead choose to invest in society's most disadvantaged people. But also, the bit I like about it is social enterprises captures a sense of movement led by people who want to challenge the status quo and create a shift in attitude. And in this case, catch on to an even better idea of, that buying of social enterprise is a good choice, and choosing social enterprise childcare would bring many other benefits. The childcare market is one where social relations play a really important part, but as much really as economic considerations, and trust becomes a key component between the provider and the consumer. Therefore, it's just that what's her name? Helen Penn looked at that, and she said it suggests that competition in the private for-profit childcare fails to provide quality childcare, as conventional economic rationales do not apply. So it's quite interesting there's sort of tension that there is in the sector. But community-based social enterprise has been highlighted as a model with the potential to provide quality childcare that can reach both affluent and disadvantaged communities, and that's precisely where we start from. A report that explored social enterprise childcare in London found that amongst them there were some very large organisations that came to resemble elements of both public and private bodies, and which in outlook and scale were vastly different from the small standalone community groups within private childcare sector. But there were lots of small businesses with well-developed social ethic and purpose. So it left with a situation was slightly uncomfortable, where that there was the idea of the language of making a profit. It makes people in the childcare sector uncomfortable. And so as a consequence of that, and what we picked up as well when we did our research, was there's a real lack of business skills amongst third sector providers. So any level of growth that we were going to do, we had to think about, whether we could address some of the bigger, more fundamental issues in this. For me, social capital is really quite critical, because it's building the fabric of society through networks, friendships, connections, trust, and relationships, and it's the basis for why we do things through multi-generational approaches. And Putnam, I'm sure many of you will have read, says that social capital is second only to poverty in the breadth and depth of its effect on children's lives. And I quote him when he says, child development is powerfully shaped by social capital. Trust, networks, and the norms of reciprocity within a child's family, school, peer groups, and larger communities have a wide-ranging effects on child's opportunity and choices, and therefore hence their behaviour and their development. So childcare organisations operating from its social values base could contribute to community cohesion and even begin to fight poverty by creating employment and offering education and training to adults to make them economically independent. So we operated on three operating principles, really: compliance, excellence, and growth. And they were the building blocks within which we looked at stuff. Morally, I didn't want to lead an organisation that sat back and complained and whined and blamed the government and the weather and waited for everybody else to do something. I actually fundamentally like all the children who come to us, and we have, as adults, have a duty of care that includes increasing access to the likes of our nurseries. I'm also being bombarded by parents who had poor experience of nurseries and who found Leaf and want a Leaf brand for them and their friends across London. But on the other hand, I didn't want to be considered an empire builder, which is often a term of abuse in the third sector, and like the abhorrence of the word profit. So again, it was how do you balance that up and find something that would make a difference. So we decided really that the area that had most potential, but most weaknesses, because there was so little about it, was social franchising. And I mean, I'll start with a health warning that, this really is about scaling and replication, and I've no way where we're going to try and pretend that there's a sort of perfect model that you can pick up and take in a suitcase. But to do that, even to get to that point, we needed to explore it in quite a lot of detail. Okay, so one of the things that was most interesting for me, actually, was when we looked at the benefits from using this model to replicate services, was the idea of how we might grow new and different leaders. And that was not something we had sort of envisaged, really. As Adair says, the truth has become increasingly clear that a democratic society does need good leadership. For leaders enable free and equal people to be effective in doing what needs to be done. The principle applies to every organisation and institution within democratic society. So my thinking was, if we could franchise successfully, we're not just then maybe running new nurseries that are in our spirit and in our way, but maybe we're creating additional social entrepreneurs so that you have then a new set of leadership out there, because they would marry the needs of innovation with also the needs of good leaders in early years. Social entrepreneurs at the cutting edge of historical transformation, and the dynamic is quite unstoppable. According to Gandhi, a small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. So is that our job? Can social franchising of a childcare organisation achieve that? Not at all. But it could actually start some thinking and some further work. When Muhammad Yunus started Grameen Bank, he said, "In creating Grameen Bank, I never had a blueprint to follow. I moved one step at a time, always thinking this step would be my last step." But it wasn't. It was one step led to another step, and the next step looked so interesting that you had to take it. I faced a situation at every turn. And if there's anything I've learned from the work we've done so far, that actually sums it up. So the thing to replicate from Grameen is not every exact detail of the model, but rather the way that they're adapted, and they changed the system to make it work. It was the adaptation and the innovation that was the most interesting thing. And in fact, that's what's been for us on the journey of exploring social franchising. It's the innovation and the adaptation. It is not a perfect model, but it has asked some interesting questions. And in particular, it helped us to strip down the LEAF model and rebuild it in a much more intelligent and articulate way, so we actually understood what we were doing in a much clearer way so that we could sell the idea on.
We already have in one sphere a model of franchising, and that's academies. One of the interesting things that I'm starting to hear from schools that are parts of these academy chains is that they kind of wish they were backed by local authorities, because some of these academy chains are incredibly controlling. And they're now being controlled from kind of sponsors in London, whereas in the old days at least they were controlled by people who were closer to hand. So how do you reconcile franchising with localism and responsiveness?
On the face of it, it should be a perfect match, localism and franchise, and gives that freedom. In fact, when we were doing the research, I read all the stuff by McDonald's and Starbucks, why not franchise, and so on. And one of the things that they kept saying was that actually innovation and the freedom to change accordingly had to be built into your franchise idea. So, for example, McFish, or whatever he is, was made by a franchisee down in Baton Rouge because fish was quite important and they noticed it. And McMuffin was made somewhere else by another franchisee because they recognized they hadn't tapped into the breakfast. So that kind of gives you the sort of opportunity for innovation. And that then is itself the challenge, especially if it's a childcare franchise, because there is no space for not controlling the quality.
So what are the things, so just if you had to choose three things that will be the same wherever I went to a LEAF childcare centre or early years centre, and three things that would be different, what would they be?
Three things would be that the first thing would be that there would be apprentices in all of the nurseries. The second thing would be that the LEAF curriculum would be operating. And the third thing is that they would all do multi-generational events. The three things that would be different is that each nursery would be doing different types of those things. So they would be reflecting the local community. So the nurseries in, say, Barking and Dagenham would be have a different approach to their sort of their community approach because of the nature of that than, say, we would have in central London here or, over in Tower Hamlets where we are too.
What lessons have you learned about the best ways of engaging parents and wider communities so that your centres are not, as it were, kind of fortresses cut off from the places around them?
One of the things that gets parents in is the fact we're not statutory. And a lot of people that we work with have not had the best experience in schools. I mean, we specialise in NEET, so, it's about how do you crack that. It's about making childcare a kind of accessible but friendly thing. For us, arts, creativity, cultural capital is a very interesting way of bringing people together and bringing people through the door. I've always been quite critical of the children's centre notion of 0 to 5, because it meant that everybody stopped at that point and they saw it as going in there because you needed a parenting class, or it became quite deficit, even though I don't think it's intended to. And so what we want to do is open that completely up so that you could come in for anything along any level of the continuum. So you could be in for your knitting class, or you could be in for your parenting class, but there isn't that kind of sense of stigma.